Occasionally, in the comments sections of my videos, I'll get someone saying something to the effect of, "How do people not know this?" Or, "I learned this like the first week the game came out, lol," and like 3 skull emojis. And I would like these kinds of comments to stop, for a couple reasons. For one thing, I want you to think about why a person would say this. Why should you care if someone's teaching something about the game that you already know? A more uncharitable interpretation, which I think is probably what's happening in at least some of these cases, is that subconsciously the people saying this are bragging. Maybe it's so they can puff their chests out and feel like they're above someone. Maybe it's the middle school tactic of making fun of someone else whenever they have some leverage over them, because that way they're the one making fun of someone instead of the one being made fun of. But whatever it is, there's probably some element of the behavior that's psychologically self-serving. A more charitable interpretation is that you're upset that in that moment, my content isn't targeted at the exact place on the learning curve that you're on right now, that you expected to learn something and instead saw something you'd already learned. If this were a real school, I'd get it. It's a waste of your time to teach you addition in your mandatory math class that takes time out of your life if you already know calculus. But this isn't your mandatory math class. It's a YouTube channel. The channel has content for people at a wide range of skill levels, from absolute beginners to people around my own skill level or even above it. One of my most popular series gives advice for people first at C rank, then at B rank, then A rank, all the way up to shooting for top 500. That's a huge spectrum that I aim to cover. While there's probably some advice for everyone in each of those videos, only one of those videos is really aimed at the skill level that you personally are at. When you come across content that isn't catering to you, I would ask that you please be understanding of the part of my audience that it does cater to. Every day, someone new is buying Splatoon 3, and videos on the absolute basics are still doing fine, because that early on, people need that information. Sure, some people have been playing Splatoon competitively since 2015, and for them, the basics feel silly to have explained again. But you can't expect that everyone around you is having the same experience you are. It's a tiny, tiny proportion of the people who will find a Splatoon video on YouTube that have been playing competitively since S1. This is not like a middle school or high school grade level cohort where everyone around you is actually taking the same classes, is expected to have the same experiences, and to be around the same reading level or the same level of skill at a musical instrument or a sport, because they all started at the same time and had the same teachers. Some of y'all are expecting people who started playing the game a week ago to have the knowledge it took you years before you learned. This is why, for so long, adults have looked at younger generations and been condescending or concerned about them. They're comparing their knowledge, built up over decades, based not just on their education, but on a long history of relationships and work experience in adult life outside what was prescribed for them to learn, to that of a kid who has only ever been in school since they learned to speak. I'm more mature now than every 8th grader I've ever met. And I've met a lot of 8th graders as an English teacher, but that's not a fair comparison. Why would we compare me as an adult to someone else who's not? Someone who's in 8th grade in 2024 stands a pretty good chance of being in a better place than I was when I was in 8th grade. 8th grade them are probably a lot funnier than 8th grade me. They're probably held to a higher standard than I was in the skills they're trying to learn, and have a better philosophical grounding than me because they've been able to learn from the mistakes of parents who aren't that far from my generation at this point. If you're gonna okay boomer someone for making an unfair criticism of your younger generation, don't go and be a hypocrite and turn that boomer mentality on someone who's less experienced than you. It's easy to forget how long it took us to learn something, to feel like we've known that thing forever, that it's always been a part of us. I remember starting to tilt in a solo queue environment once about how players weren't making the right call about an objective play, then taking a step back and realizing that I myself had only just learned what the right call was 8 days earlier from a coach. All of a sudden, that misplay had gone from a very understandable mistake to something I automatically expected all of my teammates not to do just because I'd learned it and it had become a part of the way that I saw the game. If I hadn't been lucky enough to have that coach, I would be making that same mistake, and I sure wouldn't have taken kindly to someone angrily calling me out for it. I'm on YouTube trying to level the playing field by being that coach who teaches people the basics, the misplays, the fundamentals of playing this game competitively so that people can get further than I got faster than I got there. If you're really not learning anything from being on my channel, there are top-level players who are making great content from the perspective of people who have won tournaments that I couldn't even place top 16 in. Go follow Chara and Dude and Kiver and Jared and FLC and any number of other people for a perspective that goes beyond the scope of my work. I'm not trying to get the tiny percentile of people who are at my level of skill to reach the even tinier percentile that are at top level. I'm trying to meet as many players as possible where they're at with the game. And the content I make does meet people where they actually are. My videos are inspired by questions I actually get, mistakes I actually see in-game, things that people heard me say that gave them an epiphany that I realized needed to be explained in just the way that I had said them. Most people who play this game have not unlocked X battles. It's more than the people who got there in Splatoon 2, because that system was harder. But even comparing it to the people who got to S+0 in Splatoon 2, Nintendo reported that only 7.4% of the player base were at that point a full year after the game's release. Under 15% were even in S rank. It makes way more sense for me as a full-time YouTuber, someone who benefits financially from more people seeing the ads that play on my videos, to make educational content that focuses on players that haven't even figured out what an X power is yet, than it does to cater to someone who's going to complain that they already know what those players need to learn. I get a lot of comments, and I can't sort through all of them by any means, but when I do see these kinds of things, I delete them. They don't do anyone any good, including the people who write them. And I'd rather just keep my videos as welcoming, non-judgmental resources that create space for people to learn at whatever speed they want.